Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself. We're your hosts.
I'm Scott Copeland.
I'm Rivka Brahma.
The excitement of Madrid is all around us. The scent of churros and hot chocolate drifting from nearby cafes. You can hear the hum of the Gran Via and the dappled sunlight settling on two weathered figures in the Plaza de España at the bottom of the Gran Via. Before us stand companions, friends, travelers who have wandered the world's imagination for more than 400 years. Don Quixote, gaunt, armored, his eyes lit with impossible dreams, like the song says, and Sancho Panza, steady, patient, grounded. He's seen it all before.
Throughout the episode, we're going to call Don Quixote in different names just to keep you on the toes. The monument itself is striking. Cervantes is seated high above, looking down towards his two creation, as if complicating what have they become in the world's imagination. Miguel de Cervantes' masterpiece opened with what is now the most famous paragraph in Spanish literature.
In a village of La Mancha, the name of which I have no desire to call to mind, there lived, not so long ago, one of those gentlemen that keeps a lance in his lance rack, an old buckler, a sword, a lean hack, and a racing dog. What a beautiful opening. At the time, this was very, very unique. You can hear Cervantes, the storyteller, letting you know that he's part of the story. There's an extra voice throughout the novel, self-awareness, a voice of irony, which is one of the reasons sometimes Don Quixote has been called the first modern novel.
There's also a famous Spanish story of one of the kings looking at someone outside his window. He's saying, either he's reading Cervantes because he's laughing to himself or he's just crazy. But for Jewish travelers, the monument square dedicated to Cervantes and his most famous creations is a gateway to the question that will accompany us throughout this episode of Wandering Jews. The contrast between soaring vision and daily practicality, between sky and soil, is the heartbeat of Cervantes' novel. The novel brings up the tension we know so well: dreams versus duty, messianic yearning versus daily grind and grit.
Across centuries and continents, artists have reached for Don Quixote as a model and a mirror. And so many of these artists, they've offered their own interpretations of both the knight and his squire.
For instance, Gustave Doré, 1863. His romantic sweeping engraves helped recast Quixote from a figure of satire to a tragic nobility. He looks very tragic there. There's like a air of the tragic hero. And we're not sure that that's what Cervantes is thinking about. But that's how Doré saw him.
Honorary portrayed a thin, tired wanderer with dreams that seemed way beyond his strength, in images that are both tender and painfully honest. You can feel Don Quixote in pain in those portraits.
Japanese artist Serizawa Kisuke. In his work, Don Quixote becomes a samurai wearing traditional Japanese gear. Proof that knights travel easily across cultures, from Spain to Japan.
And a lot of us know, coming back to Spain, Picasso, 1955, this famous ink drawing uses a few bold, playful lines to conjure the knight, his squire, and the burning sun of La Mancha.
The novel arrived in 1605, the dawn of Renaissance, and 130 years after the ruling of Expulsion that forced Jews from Spain. It was revolutionary because it was among the first texts to treat ordinary people as worthy subjects of writing. It was not a book about God and gods or saints or demons. It was not about the supernatural, but about the natural farmers and workers. Pubs and dirty roads and tarnished armor for a delusional knight fighting his own aging and mortality.
Don Quixote was born of a printing revolution and the introduction of new technologies. Books began to be available to many more people for much less money. The printing press gave birth to a new world. Maybe similarly to a lot of our new technologies are giving birth to a new world that we haven't yet become used to.
Did you say AI?
For example,
ultimately, Don Quixote asks a timeless question. Should we accept the world as it is, or insist on seeing it as it ought to be?
Jewish wisdom throughout the centuries echoed this question. And in the ethics of our ancestors, our fathers and mothers, Pirkei Avot, is the quotation, "It's not your duty to complete the work, but you are also not free to desist from it."
And in Hebrew, "Lo alecha המלאכה לגמור, ולא אתה בן חורין להיבטל ממנה." Don Quixote is not alone. Can you imagine the well-meaning traveler knight traveling across Spain? His sidekick, Sancho Pancho, is Quixote's essential counterweight, practical, humorous, even somewhat cynical, with his feet planted firmly in the ground. In the famous windmill scene, for instance, Don Quixote sees an ominous row of giants in the distance, and Sancho Pancho pleads, "Look, your worship, what we see there are not giants, but windmills." Yet through their travels, maybe Sancho becomes more idealistic, while Quixote becomes slightly more realistic. They rub off each other. This is maybe we see a lot of these duos throughout history, throughout art, throughout literature. Maybe even start with Moses and Aaron as the first duo. Batman and Robin.
Hillel and Shammai.
Phileas Fogg and Passepartout.
Tarzan and Jane.
Ooh. To many Jewish readers, Sancho resembles the Yiddish schlemiel, the loving realist, the wise fool who grounds others without crushing their dreams.
We might want to also ask, in this book, though, check it out. You have giants, but the giants are only in Don Quixote's imagination. There are no real monsters. As Sancho Panza suggests, there's only windmills. Do we sometimes set out to battle things that don't require our concern? Perhaps there's a question about, hey, when the monster is real, or maybe not real, but why did we see a monster there in the first place?
Some people even say that this is one of the first depictions of schizophrenia in literature, basically. People who are seeing things that are not seeing. And we know now that sometimes fighting those visions is not a good idea. You just go with it. And again, ask yourself, why do we see monsters? Is it our need, or are they really there? The Jewish fascination with Don Quixote found new expression far away from Spain, in a nation that didn't even exist when the novel was first published. In America, in the 1960s, New York Broadway shared 3 stories about dreams that were imagined, shattered, and handed down to new dreamers with new dreams.
So we're going to run the risk of dating ourselves because we're taking it back a bit. But 1960, Camelot, Alan J. Lerner. It offered a mythic kingdom, the kingdom of Arthur and Guinevere and Merlin and Lancelot, yearning for justice and moral leadership, but finding not so simple to implement it in the real world.
In 1964, Fiddler on the Roof by Joseph Stein and Sheldon Harnick. It depicted a bittersweet struggle between tradition and change.
The town of Anatevka, Tevye the milkman, taken, of course, from Shalom Aleichem. And, coming back to Don Quixote, The Man of La Mancha, 1965. Mitch Lee, Lieberstein, Joe Darien, and Dale Wasserman. It recast Don Quixote as a hero of conscience. And in each of these plays, one could argue, Jews were involved in the writing, in the music, in the production, in the direction. Why? What was it about these stories of utopias found and lost, and life romanced, idealized, and broken that so captured these Jewish writers and creative minds?
For American Jews, Quixote felt familiar. He was a perpetual dreamer, the believer in tikkun olam, fixing the world, and the mocked idealist who refuses to surrender. In an America wrestling with civil rights, cultural and political upheaval, the Man of La Mancha stood as a sibling to Fiddler's humanity and Camelot's moral longing.
The famous song from Don Quixote, To Dream the Impossible Dream, check out at some time how many different versions there are of that song and how it's lived since it was first put out there, was the theme song of Don Quixote. It was the spirit of the song. It was also part of the DNA, one could say, of Camelot and of Fiddler on the Roof. Dream, hope, don't give in. Don't listen to the naysayers, and don't surrender to the rough and tumble of real life.
In Hebrew, the first translation of Don Quixote was made by Chaim Nachman Bialik, the national poet. He didn't translate it from Spanish. We know he didn't know Spanish. He probably translated it from an abbreviated version that he had from Russia, and he removed dozens of chapters, mostly dealing with Christianity and maybe a little bit about what he considered to be not prude enough.
Too racy. Too hot,
exactly.
Too hot to handle.
And for generations, Israelis read Don Quixote from Bialik's translation. Now we have a beautiful translation by Tal Nitzan that we study at schools, some of the schools, but that was the Don Quixote that a lot of people grew up with. But I think there's a very good reason why Bialik felt connected to Don Quixote. There's a very famous scene of the library burning, leaving your knowledge behind and going on a quest for knowledge. And I think that very much talks to the Haskalah movement known as the Enlightenment movement. People who are leaving the Batei Midrash behind and going on a quest.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. In Bialik's poem, Livadi, all by myself, that's exactly the story of the poem, of looking out the window from the room of study, from the Beit Midrash, longing for a bigger world. This was the dream of the Enlightenment. And eventually he does leave this young man and leaves behind something that is really part of him and hence heartbreaking, but goes into a new world that also has something which is freer, larger, maybe more liberating, that he is yet to find. Look, Bialik, in the process of writing and editing and figuring out what the Hebrew Don Quixote would sound like, he was living in a time, and especially his work, it was very serious. There was a lot at stake, the beginning of the Zionist movement, the resurrection of Hebrew. He tried to use the book to emphasize nationalist themes. And so he kind of recast Don Quixote from this kind of comic wandering knight into a solemn, tragic man of the book. And so there was a lot changed there and interpreted. But this, takes us back to the artists that we mentioned earlier. Each period, each person with their own Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Bialik aimed in a lot of ways to make the story of the knight part of the Jewish people's rebirth, also proving that Hebrew was a living global language, capable of hosting the world's masterpieces and not a local jargon of some remote tribe resurrecting itself in a lonely corner of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Right. But when you read Don Quixote, it's a funny book.
Yeah.
You laugh out loud. The Yiddish literature...
Hence laughter.
Exactly. Had the Jewish Quixote. Are Benjamin and Sandrel in Mendele Mocher Sfarim's The Travel of Benjamin III, Masaot Binyamin HaShlishi. Mendele was a fundamental author and social critic known as the grandfather of modern Yiddish literature. Check out our podcast about Yiddish. His name was Shulam Yankev Abramovitz. He used the pseudonym of Mendele the Book Peddler and transformed Jewish literature through sharp satire of the 19th century shtetl life.
In the Travels of Benjamin III, Benjamin, he's a dreamer like Don Quixote. He convinces himself that he's destined to find a mythical paradise beyond the Sambotion River and to locate the 10 lost tribes, right? A very small task, minor.
As we say.
Like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, Benjamin and his sidekick, Senderl, they wander in circles. They actually stay pretty close to home, to the shtetl they live in. But they imagine they're going to distant kingdoms. They imagine they're engaging in great battles. They imagine they're vanquishing all kinds of enemies. It's a gentle parody of Jewish longing, a portrait of how fierce the desire for redemption can be, even when your feet never leave familiar mud.
Don Quixote remained a familiar character in Hebrew even after Bialik. Israeli musicians and songwriters have used Don Quixote as a foil and mirror. Each songwriter and song reveals how different eras in the state understood themselves. Let's look at those.
So Arik Einstein, let's start with, one of the people who's really seen as, in Malagid, the prince, the king of Israeli pop music in the early 1970s. In some ways, he himself was the symbol of this liberal, secular sabra, an identity of rebuilding and of reclaiming. And his music was popular all throughout his career. And literally when he passed away, it was a kind of national day of mourning. It was the passing not just of Eric Einstein, but of maybe also a certain part of this Sabra identity.
A part of Israeliana.
Yeah, a part of Israeliana, exactly. And his Don Quixote, it reflects a modern, weary, but still idealistic Israel following the 6 Days War. In this particular song, Einstein gently urges the knight to put the armor in a box, because maybe battle is no longer as romantic as it is in a novel when you've actually had to be in one. And the battles, at least in modern Israel maybe, are also very bureaucratic and very political, and in some ways very, very venomous. And Arik Einstein has another song about sitting in his house on Shabbat morning, reading the newspaper, relaxing. And there was something about who he was as a person, particularly as he got older, that he very much retreated from the public eye, maybe because he felt that, hey, to be Don Quixote, it's not worth it. It's much more comfortable to be in your own chair, drinking a cup of coffee and listening to the radio.
Yeah, but I think that was a little bit naive. Now, after the war, telling people, put down your armor is a quest, an ask, and a challenge to all of us.
Yeah, especially when so many Israelis were asked to put on the armor and to go out to deal with just the basic reality of, hey, we were attacked. We were injured very badly on all kinds of levels. We lost way too many. And someone has to be there to defend our own families, our own neighborhoods, our own homes.
And we're learning every day how to leave without an armor. And we know that that is a challenge, and it's not poof, a magic. All of us are learning how to live without an armor, and maybe we still need it also.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Another Israeli artist who picked up and played with Don Quixote was Arkady Dukhin. He really took the version written by Einstein and the arrangement by Shem Tov Levi. He recorded a new arrangement of the song. His version reflects a bit of a different Israel. It was done in the 1990s. It was an Israel maybe searching for itself, massive Soviet immigration. Who's an Israeli? The Oslo process, peace. At what price? The song itself, very kind of jazzy, atmospheric. It created a Quixote that, I don't know, kind of suggests a little bit more inner-directed, a little bit more ready to question. Maybe we were at a different stage, a little bit more mature. The question didn't scare us, even though we didn't have a real answer.
Also, Arkady Dukhin, coming from a Soviet Union background, making Aliyah to Israel, brings in a little bit of a Russian troubadour quality to the song.
Definitely. And look, it goes without saying, not saying that Arik Einstein wasn't a great musician and songwriter. Arkady Dukhin is an amazing, amazing musician.
What a lot of people don't know about Arkady Dukhin, that it's not only the songs he sung, he wrote so many songs that are Israeli classic that nobody knows he wrote.
And again, that's another thing, part of this issue, this quest for identity of how do you become part of when you grew up somewhere else and those memories are still very much a part of you.
The pain of having two motherlands.
Yeah.
Danny Sanderson, one of my favorites, basically the creator and the magic behind a group you might know called Kaveret, had a different version about Don Quixote. It's a different song. It's basically focusing on the love story between Don Quixote and his beloved Dulcinea. And she's telling him there, "Oh, Don Quixote, don't be so naive," reflecting on an Israel caught between peace process, hopes, and fears in public debate, and a harsh reality. I think Don Quixote touches the Israeli soul in a very weak spot, because our fear of looking naive, or in Hebrew, being called a freier, is a very, very big fear. And Don Quixote does not care. He does not care how he looks like, because he believes that this windmill is a monster. And for Israelis to be caught weak or maybe looked upon as pathetic is a very big scare.
It's funny because Danny Sanderson was very, very influenced by American music, and particularly by kind of beach rock, grew up in New York. And, Sanderson, even physically, let's face it, Danny Sanderson does not look like Bruce Springsteen. And I love Donnie Sanderson, but I think he, in his humor and in his music, also plays with his own physicality a little bit in terms of, hey, I'm the schlemiel. You know, I'm not the typical Israeli, and I'm cool with that. And we should all learn how to be kind of comfortable on our own skin and a little bit poke fun of it, because maybe if we can do that, we can live in a place that's a few degrees more relaxed than it currently is. So on that level, I think he has an important kind of also cultural message to give, which is not just about his music or solely about his music.
Right, about the ability to laugh about yourself and to not take yourself so seriously.
Yeah,
that
100%.
is the lesson from Donnie Sanderson.
Yeah, 100%. In that sense, this image and identity and Don Quixote as a way to play with that. Representing Israel, Dana International won the Eurovision Song Contest in 1998 with the song Diva. On the album, The Collection, called Diva, released that same year, there is a song called Don Quixote. So the Dana International song is obviously all about that, and it's kind of coming off of or connected with, in some ways, our conversation now connected with Sanderson, the first openly transgender artist to win the Eurovision Song Contest. Beyond her pop success, Dana International is a powerful symbol of liberal Israel, a trailblazer for LGBTQ plus rights, having bridged a gap between the Tel Aviv underground and bringing her as a character, as an identity, as a superstar to the Israeli national mainstream. And in some ways, her Don Quixote was like, yeah, listen, don't be so quick to say that those monsters don't exist. There are monsters out there, and we have to stand on stage proud and run them down. And in that sense, I think there's a really important lesson here also about standing for yourself, standing for what's right, and not being afraid to present and be seen in the public eye.
But let's talk a little bit about Cervantes. Who is Cervantes?
So Cervantes, it's interesting. Miguel Cervantes, it's pretty clear he came from a very long-standing, noble Spanish Catholic family. But you know, just like we had this discussion once in the podcast about Columbus, there were those scholars who began to debate, hey, this dude Cervantes, maybe he was from a converso, from a new Christian background. Maybe originally there are Jews hiding in his closet who were forced to become publicly Catholic, but maintain some memory and allegiance to their Jewish secret selves. And again, we go back to some of the things we just talked about in terms of identity and pride and standing and representation. And it's a great story that maybe Cervantes is a member of the tribe, but unfortunately, there's really no evidence that conclusively has answered the question of Cervantes' family story. And so I think we have to kind of, be content, at least at this stage, of his lineage as a proud Spanish Catholic. Although in the book, he doesn't mention Jews, Don Quixote. He does mention Muslims. He does mention different kinds of Christian groups who are not Catholics. But is he actually Jewish? Can't vouch for that.
Yeah. But as we shared, Jewish and Israeli culture, it doesn't matter to them. They didn't wait for proof. Quixote has been embraced as an honorary member of the tribe, regardless of his actual lineage. We embraced this dreamer fighting demons and fighting just causes.
As we return to the Plaza de España, as the late afternoon light falls across the bronze figures, we're reminded that, hey, meaningful life requires both the dreamer and the grounding friend. We're reminded that adventures also might be right outside our door, and that humor can help heal the injuries of the road.
As Jewish tradition tells us, you may not finish the work, but you are not free to stop. As we stand before Cervantes, Don Quixote, and Sancho Panza, we need to ask ourselves, am I a dreamer? Am I Don Quixote? Am I Sancho Panza? Am I a realist? Or maybe I'm both? And how do I balance between them?
So we've mentioned a few different songs, each one of them that mention Don Quixote. Check in the links below the explanation of the podcast, and you'll be able to find a playlist pointing you to all the recordings that were mentioned here in this episode. And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, I'm Dan Gazit. I'm a tour educator on J Square Adventures. For the last 11 years, I've lived in Mitzpe Ramon, in the heart of the Israeli Negev desert. But before Mitzpe Ramon, I spent 3 years in Spain, more specifically in Barcelona. And here's my something for the road. I would like to recommend a book, a historical novel called The Cathedral of the Sea by the Catalan writer Ildefonso Falcones, which is based in Catalonia around Barcelona. I have a special place in my heart for Barcelona, and this is a book I read while I was living there. The book is set in the 1300s, Catalonia, which is a very crucial time in the history of Catalonia and in what we would later call Spain. But this is a time when Spain, as we know it today, still doesn't exist. And this is also important as we tour Spain today. It's important to understand how Spain is actually made of, it's a patchwork of historical kingdoms that came together at some point in history. Now, the 1300s is a time, it's actually the height of the kingdom of Catalonia, or rather the kingdom of Aragon, which was another union, but Barcelona was a major city in it. Now, let me tell you a bit about the story. The story follows the life of a man called Arnau Estanyol from the time of his birth till his death, basically. It's a historical saga. Arnau was born to a serf family, but at some point, his father and him escape from their miserable life on their farm to the city of Barcelona, which is just growing. And later Arnau just moves on in society. At some point, he's a bastaix, which in Catalan means stone carrier for construction. And later he becomes an affluent man in Catalan society. Now, the 1300s is it's a crucial time in Catalan history because, first of all, it's the end of feudalism. We see how farmer society is breaking up, how the feudal lords are losing their power, and how the cities, such as Barcelona, are growing with professionals and traders, with the professional guilds. And this is exactly where we walk into the story. We see Arnau's father managing to escape his life as a perpetual serf and becoming a free man in the city. Another main point in history in the 1300s is, as I said, it's the height of the crown of Aragon, of which Barcelona is a part of. Aragon at that time is actually a Mediterranean empire. It has colonies overseas, islands such as the Balearic Islands and Sardinia, and lands even in nowadays Italy. It's actually a superpower at the time, and Barcelona is concentrating all this power. Now, for us Jews, it's also important to note that the 1300s is the onset of institutionalized anti-Semitism. In the book, we meet the Inquisition. Now, this is not yet the Spanish Inquisition, which was persecuting converted Jews. This is the Catholic Church Inquisition persecuting heretics in general. But sometimes the Jews are also targeted. And in the story, Arnau creates relations with Jews. And we also encounter how Jews got into trouble because they were forced to be the only ones lending with interest, which was illegal according to the Catholic Church. So Jews were basically limited. They were barred from other professions, and they were limited to lending money with interest, therefore generating hatred towards them and persecution. The book is called The Cathedral of the Sea. Now, the whole story revolves around a very special church in the old city of Barcelona called Santa Maria del Mar. It's not actually a cathedral, but the Cathedral by the Sea is a sort of nickname it has. And the special thing about it, and that's beautifully described in the book, is how that church was financed and designed and built by the people, by the professional guilds, by the simple people, and not by the church institution. And also the story describes the quarter, La Ribera. La Ribera is the riverbank where this church was built. And when you read it, sometimes you may ask yourself if that author was actually living in Barcelona in the 1300s, because it goes into so much details of everyday life, of when the fish market was and what the relationship between the different guilds were, and just different routines and customs that were prevalent in the 1300s Barcelona. As a visitor to Spain and to Barcelona in general, you walk the streets and you can pretty much imagine where the church was, where all the markets were. Even nowadays, you can sometimes see the signatures of the different professional guilds on different buildings in the old city of Barcelona. In general, this book just brings you back to the glory days of Barcelona in the Middle Ages. On a side note, the book is from 2006, and it was turned into a Netflix series, which was aired in 2018. So thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on one of the next J Square Adventures tours.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's jsquaredadventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures.
And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Rivka.
I'm Scott. See you soon at J Squared Adventures, Wandering Jews.